Michigan is investigating into missing Eric Lee Franks, which continues over a decade later. The 38-year-old was last seen on March 14, 2011 by the owner of the motel where he was staying when he paid for a week of rent. 38-year-old Eric Franks had two big dreams in life. One was he dreamed of working in Hollywood, and he actually moved out to California for a while and worked on some small sets. The other one was to have a family. Eric lived in Tupelo, Mississippi for quite some time. His brother-in-law, Chad, which they have been in brother-in-laws for 14 years whenever Eric vanished. Chad believes Eric's dream to have a family may have unfortunately been connected to his disappearance. That kind of dream will end up playing into the part of what happened to him, they think. Eric moved to Saginaw, Michigan after he'd reconnected with an ex-girlfriend, Kendra Firmingham, on social media in May of 2010. He figured out that she actually had his biological child, and he was never aware of that before. He was in contact with the mother, his former girlfriend. The mother was, expressing that she and her husband were having, things weren't going well. Kendra Firmingham was married to a man named John Carnes. Eric soon moved to Michigan under the belief that he and Kendra were going to get together and be a happy little family. About a week after Eric arrived in Michigan, he met his daughter, Emily. He was there for a few months and did meet his daughter and did have a relationship with the mother before he disappeared. After a few months that Eric was living in Michigan, he would always stay in touch with his family back in Ohio. Every few weeks, she always knew where he was, his mom did. She always knew what he was doing. Eric mainly stayed in contact by phone and occasionally email. So when Eric went quiet for a couple of weeks in late winter of 2011, the Franks family knew something was wrong. Joanne hadn't heard from him. She would call and leave messages. He said he wouldn't call back. Chad explained that Eric told his family that he was going to be moving to a new house with Kendra and that the cell service wasn't going to be great. So the family waited, hoping to get back in touch with Eric. The last day that Joanne and another friend of Eric's heard his voice was March 10th. Then the months following, Joanne received some emails from her son, though through the summer, about once a month, she would get something that was supposedly from him. Even at the time, especially looking back, she was like, that just doesn't sound like Eric. By November 2011, his mother, Joanne, decided to report Eric missing. She finally decided, I think something's wrong. She basically sent a message and said, unless I hear your voice, I'm going to the police. She didn't hear Eric's voice. Joanne reported her only son missing to the police. Detective Sergeant Bill Art of the Michigan State Police about Eric's disappearance spoke with Dateline. Detective Art told Dateline that Eric's mother, Joanne, had called the Bridgeport Township Police Department in the Eric had been staying at before officially reporting him missing. She called the Bridgeport Police Department and said, hey, can somebody go check for Eric? Detective Art said, however, the detective said there's no record of a wellness check actually taking place. She called Archbold Police Department. Detective Art said this was Joanne's local police department in Archbold, Ohio. Her official police report is November 14, 2011. Detective Art told Dateline that for 16 months, Eric's case passed through different departments before landing with the Michigan State Police. His brother-in-law, Chad Bose, told Dateline that the Archbold Police Department was nothing but helpful and on the ball, even though they were so far away from where Eric lived. Chad said once Eric was reported in mid-November 2011, the Archbold Police jumped into action. They contacted the Saginaw Police Department, Bridgeport Township Police Department, and eventually the case passed to the Buena Vista Township Police Department, where Kendra Firmingham lived in December 2011. And then Detective Art said, it's almost 2 years before they asked us to help. Detective said that the changing of hands has negatively affected Eric's case. It's a detriment, he said. We don't get involved in the case until March of 2013. Evidence that may have been readily discovered in 2011, he said, may have no longer been so 2 years later. When investigators began looking into Eric's case, they found that he had been staying at a place called Miller's Motel. They determined he was last seen on March 14, 2011, when he paid for his week's rent. So Eric had been staying there a couple of months prior to him being reported missing, Detective Arnold told Dateline. The owner of the motel, Dan Patel, was one of the last people who saw Eric. Eric paid him for a week's stay, Detective Art said. At the type of motel, you typically pay a week in advance. Detective Art told Dateline that payment is the last paper record of Eric. When asked if there were any security cameras at the motel, Detective Art replied, no, there probably still isn't security footage there. According to Eric's brother-in-law, the motel owner, Dan Patel, noticed that Eric's car was gone that week and that the lights were on in his room, but it didn't look like anyone was inside. Then the motel owner said he observed a woman cleaning out Eric's room. This woman turned out to be Kendra Firmingham. Detective Art confirmed that Dan Patel reported to the police that he did not see Eric cleaning out the motel room. Dan mentions that he saw only Kendra cleaning out the motel, Detective Art said, and that Eric wasn't there. This occurred about a week after the motel owner last saw Eric in person. Detective Art confirmed that police asked Kendra about this at the time. Kendra's story was that she went to the motel to help Eric clean it out. He said he told Dateline that Kendra told officials that Eric wanted to go to California, so she helped him clean his motel room out. Detective Art said that the police then checked Eric's cell phone activity. There's some outgoing calls after the day he was last seen, Detective Art said. According to his brother-in-law, there were many calls made from his brother-in-law's phone in the weeks after he was last seen, to auto repair shops, to Kendra's phone, to a general surgeon, to salvage yards, auto parts stores, a car dealer, a dentist's office where Kendra Firmingham and John Carnes were patients, but Eric was not. Detective Art confirmed that officials were able to trace back a few of the calls from Eric's phone. The one to the auto parts or auto service station, he said. And there was a call to the dentist, and I think there was one more that they were absolutely able to trace back to the related to Kendra. The detective also confirmed those calls took place after Eric's disappearance in March 2011, but there were no other calls that they weren't able to verify who or what or where they came from. Detective Art told Dateline in an email that the last outgoing from Eric's phone was to the Saginaw County Animal Control on May 6, 2011. The previous investigators did a lot of work in this case, Detective Art told Dateline. Our agency put it out to Crime Stoppers. Eric's case was submitted to NAMUS, and other national missing persons website. They did checks for any credit cards or social security stuff that they could come up with, he said. In an email, Detective Art detailed all of the searches conducted for Eric throughout the years. He said they searched local scrap yards, canvassed the neighborhood, utilized aerial searches, and sent out cadaver dogs many times. Eric was nowhere to be found. They never found any property associated with Eric. We never found anything in an email to Dateline. Detective Art said that Kendra told investigators that Eric took his personal belongings when he left to California. Chad Bose believes someone else was using Eric's phone. They have reason to think that someone had possession of his phone because that's how those emails were being sent, his brother-in-law said, referring to the messages Eric's mother had received after he was last seen. He wasn't talking like himself, and he wasn't spelling like himself, and so on, so it's pretty clear to us that it wasn't him. While Detective Art doesn't remember seeing the emails personally, he noted that there was no way to verify who sent them. In September of 2012, Eric's family put up missing posters for him and reported his car, a 2001 Chevy Malibu with Ohio plates, and stolen. Officials executed many searches for Eric's car, too. The detectives, they did everything they could think of. They went to local scrap yards looking for that car, thinking maybe something demolished it. Did some searches right away, some cadaver dog searches right away. Detective Art said the cadaver dogs were used at both Miller's Motel and the property where Kendra, Firmingham, and Carnes lived. They searched the house. They did quite a bit of work, he said, but again, nothing was found. Chad told Dateline that Eric's motel room was searched too. They'd done a limited amount of checking or processing on that room years and years later, and Chad told Dateline. But those hotel rooms get painted and repainted and cleaned and recleaned so many times. His brother-in-law said there was no evidence of anything happening to Eric in that motel room. Detective Arndt confirmed investigators were not able to recover any evidence at that motel and recalled that the motel owner just had changed the carpeting at the motel. At one point, Detective Arndt told Dateline an eyewitness came forward and said that they saw John Carnes threaten Eric's life outside the motel. That gentleman was interviewed, he said. He said that what happened, that John was threatening Eric during an argument or something. Detective Arndt said they asked Carnes about this interaction, but noted that Carnes won't say anything at all to officials. Detective Arndt said authorities have Eric's dental records on file, just in case. They ended up getting some dental records, he said. In case you know, there was another missing person nationally that wound up missing that couldn't be identified. Detective confirmed foul play suspected in Eric's disappearance and that the Michigan State Police consider Kendra, Firmingham, and John Carnes persons of interest in the case. However, he noted there was never been enough evidence to make an arrest. It's all circumstantial, he said. There's no good evidence. Detective Art told Dateline that officials confronted Kendra many times, but nothing ever came of those interviews. Polygraphs were never taken, the detective said, adding they were offered, of course. According to Detective Art, in either 2014, the Michigan State Police presented Eric's case to the prosecutor and suggested charges. There just wasn't enough evidence, he said. In 2016, Kendra Firmingham died reportedly of cancer. Dateline has been unable to reach Kendra's husband, John Carnes, for comment. In an email to Dateline, Detective Art confirmed that Kendra Firmingham was directly asked if she killed Eric. The detective said that her statement in response was, "Oh, God, no." He also confirmed that Kendra continued to deny any involvement with Eric's disappearance. According to Detective Art, Kendra's husband, John Carnes, was also asked if he had anything to do with Eric's disappearance, murder, or to help dispose of his body. The detective said Carnes categorically denied any involvement in the case at all. Dateline also reached out to Kendra and Eric's daughter, Emily, who is now an adult, but did not receive a response. Detective Arndt told Dateline that Emily was interviewed by police, didn't have much to say, but she was interviewed. He told Dateline she didn't know much. His brother-in-law, Chad Boss, told Dateline the same thing about his niece. They did speak to her when she was a minor, and she was home with her parents. She claimed she does not know anything. She did admit to having met Eric, having done things with Eric. They went roller skating, she remembered. They went to the mall, bowling, she thinks. Eric's case slowly grew cold. The family held out hope that maybe if they found Eric's car, which actually belonged to his mother, Joanne, that they'll find Eric. The car was also nowhere to be found. He said part of the way they were hoping they would be able to track down Eric was to be able to put a watch out for the car. His brother-in-law, Chad, said because the car was titled to Joanne, there was no way for him to legally sell the car because he didn't have the title, and that there was no way for him to renew the plates when the time came. Because the car wasn't registered to him, the police had always told them the car is going to turn up. The car is going to turn up. That's how we're going to find out, where Eric is. 9 years after Eric's disappearance, the car did turn up. We never could find his car. until 2020, Detective Art told Dateline. In 2020, the family got information from an internet sleuth that there was a hit on the car on Eric's car, the detective said. What happened was the vehicle was parked in a garage in Saginaw. The owner died and they sold the house, or, the car, the house, the contents, at an auction. The person who bought the car at the auction took it to be inspected. When he did that, it hit on Carfax. Detective Martin said, referring to the vehicle identification number VIN. Chad told Dateline this story as well. He said a criminal justice student named Miranda Bobman in California had seen a story about Eric's disappearing on a TV show. She was aware because of her criminal justice studies that if you put a VIN in a Carfax and get email alerts anytime a record pops up on that vehicle, she said. In the fall of 2020, about 3 years after she input the VIN in Carfax, Miranda got a notification. She gets a notification on August 31st of 2020, and the car had been given an oil change, Chad said. She didn't even remember, what car is this? And she was racking her brain trying to remember. Chad said Miranda finally put two and two together and reached out to Eric's family in Ohio. In a message to Dateline, Miranda said, I'm thrilled to hear Eric's case is receiving renewed attention. I hope this article encourages anyone who may have information to come forward. It's been 11 plus years now, and it's time for Eric to finally come home and for his family to get the answers and justice they deserve. Chad and his wife, Beth, just happened to be in Michigan on vacation when Joanne called to tell them the news. We were like, well, we can't stop at that place, Chad said, and I kept thinking to myself, this is probably, a typo or something. It wasn't a typo. When Chad and Beth got to where the car was worked on and explained why they were there, an employee told them that they remembered the car, so they got permission to tell them. The owner of the car, which turned out to be another car dealer, Chad said. Chad and Beth raced over to the dealership. I was expecting the car was going to be sitting out on the parking lot, something like for sale, Chad said. He said they explained the story again, this time to the owner of the dealership, and so I'm like, is the car still here? And he said, yes, sitting in the next room over. Chad told Dateline, we get up and walk around the corner, and there's Eric's car. Chad, who was a car salesman himself, said the car looked just like the day he sold it to Joanne. I mean, it's sitting there all cleaned up and shiny and like a time machine. Chad said the owner of the car dealership had bought Eric's car from an estate sale. The estate was that of a man named Gerald Rutledge, Chad said. Gerald was a person who was basically in an invalid, couldn't leave his house. Detective Art confirmed this information as well and believes the car being in Rutledge's garage was not accidental. It was not totally random, he said. It was a connection to Kendra. Chad told Dateline that before Gerald Rutledge died, Kendra had been his caregiver. The car had been hidden in his garage and he couldn't go out to see it. He probably wasn't even aware it was there, but it had been there all those years just sitting in the garage. Chad said they called the police with the news. As soon as they identified the car, they immediately called Michigan State Police and talked to the detective that was in charge of Eric's case at the time. Chad told Dateline they dropped everything and came out and, they took possession of the vehicle and processed it. Detective Art confirmed the Michigan State Police processed Eric's car. The new owner was super cooperative. They ended up towing the car down to the lab and having it processed for any evidence. Detective Art told Dateline the only thing that came out of it that there was a spot of blood on the driver's seat. When the blood was tested, the results came back as belonging to Eric. It wasn't very large. It was just a speck of blood, but it did come back to Eric. The detective told Dateline that officials did another search after the car was found. They went back to where the car was actually parked, the garage where the car was parked. What they found was a fresh spot of concrete in the driveway or in the garage. So their investigators dug the cement out of the excavator and did a cadaver dog search. But they didn't find anything there either. They searched the whole property and nothing was found. In an email, Detective Art said that there was another set of cadaver dog searches in 2022 of both an abandoned house in Saginaw and the area around Miller's Motel in Bridgeport Township again. Nothing of note was found. Detective Art said that at this point, one of the three things is needed to close the case: find Eric, find additional evidence, or have someone come forward with information. It will always be open, Detective Art said. It's just a cold case. We have zero reason to think that Eric is still living, Chad Bowes said of his brother-in-law's fate. He never in his life had been out of touch with his family. Eric's mother, Joanne, runs the Facebook page Find Eric Lee Franks, which I am currently a part of, to share news and updates about her son. Eric would be 50 years old today, which honestly he'd be older than that now because time has passed since this article was written. He was 6'1", 175 pounds with brown eyes. His hair was black at the time of his disappearance. Detective Art told Dayline in an email that the Michigan State Police just began a cold case investigation team and that at some point this case will be re-examined for further leads and investigation. Anyone with information should call the Michigan State Police at 810-733-9380 or the Missing Persons Unit at 855-642-4847. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to this, as I've been following this case now for several years. And I do apologize about my dogs barking in the background.